Hey everybody, welcome to our program today. I am Dawn Zoldai, the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting, and I'm going to be your host for this show. We're going to be talking about drone law and regulations, and very interesting. We do have Wings credit for this, so we'll tell you a little bit about how you can take the test and get that credit. For those that don't know me, I have spent a wonderful career dedicated in service to the United States Air Force, both on active duty as a judge advocate general, which is a military attorney, and then as a general counsel, associate general counsel at the Air Force Academy, and then also was on faculty at the United States Air Force Academy as well. I'm the host of several podcasts, actually, as Dawn of Drones was one of our first ones. We now have the full crew and the full tilt. We'll talk about those a little bit later. I also do a ton of writing. So what you're going to see now is a panel presentation at my very first event called Law Tech Connect Workshop. We held that event in conjunction with AUVSI XPONENTIal this year in Orlando, Florida. That was in April. And we were able to tape all of those incredible panels. So this course is going to basically revolve around one of those panels. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you can access all 8 hours of that content here shortly. And basically, that's about it for now. We're going to go ahead and, I believe, roll film.
So our moderator today for this panel is Karen DeMeo. Karen is the CEO of Aero DeMeo and has had a spectacular career in the FAA for a whole host of years, and brings all that wealth of experience to her current company, consulting for so many clients in the regulatory and policy space. So Karen, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to you. And where did Jonathan just go? Isn't he on? Get back up here. Okay, he's getting a drink. Okay, so, all right, so here we go. Go ahead, Karen.
Well, thanks for introducing me, Dawn, and for not saying how many decades I actually worked for the FAA. But I appreciate it. I'm really excited now to be on the industry side of things. I have been for the last 4 years or so, and I'm also really excited to stand before you not in my pajama pants. So welcome back, everyone, to the conference world. I have a great panel here, and I'm actually going to let them introduce themselves because I think they'll do best justice to that. And one thing that our panel is going to be more of a fast pace because Dawn gave us a lot of topics in policy and regulation to cover. So we'll be going through things pretty quickly, and we'll start off with just quick intros each. And maybe, so they can see you, maybe sure. Slide down one more.
Okay.
That way, if I get tired, I can sit down too.
Yeah. So Jonathan Ruprecht, I'm an aviation attorney. You saw me just a second ago. I've done all sorts of things with litigation on the criminal defense side, suing the FAA, waivers, exemptions, authorizations. Yeah, that's about it.
Thanks, John.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Kevin Morris with the FAA. I'm here because Don said, would you like to come talk to a bunch of attorneys about FAA regulations? And I said, yeah, sure, throw me in the room. I've been with the FAA for about 15 years. The first 14 years of that were in flight standards, where I was working in the field office. I did aircraft accident investigation, pilot certification. I moved into the headquarters and started writing policy, a lot of stuff around drones, 44809, Part 107. I also do a lot of public speaking engagements, so the Office of Communications decided I'd be a good fit there. So for the past year, I've been in the Office of Communications, and I manage all the FAA's sort of outward-facing communications when it relates to unmanned aircraft systems.
Hey, Grant Giat. Until a couple weeks ago, I was in private practice. Prior to that, I worked with a mid-sized law firm. I've been working with law, practicing for about 12 years now, and working heavily in the drone space for about 5 years. Up until 2 weeks ago, like I said, I was in practice, but I recently accepted a job with DroneUp as their Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, so I'm doing that right now. A lot of what my current role involves is working with FAA and other government stakeholders to try and modify the regulatory environment as best as possible to make drone delivery operations more ubiquitous.
Okay, with that, thank you, gentlemen. With that, we'll get started. But But before I do that, I just kind of want to see who all is in the audience, just so we know who we're talking to. So how many people in the audience actually are attorneys? If you raise your hand, okay. And you guys can raise your hand too, yeah? And then how many of us are non-attorneys? Oh, great, we're just about 50-50, that's outstanding. The way I would introduce this group, fast talker, FAA talker, and Southern talker. So that's how we're rolling today. Anyway, so what we want to talk to you about mostly is we want to level set where we are with policy and regulations, and then share some insights and some knowledge about, what to watch for in regulations in the coming years. And, what we see is in progress. And we're going to be going over, I think, Dawn, I have a slide that talks about all our topics. So we have that one rolling up next. So we're going to talk about things, obviously, beyond visual line of sight, which is one of our hugest advancements we're seeking. Delivery, whether it's Part 135 or other ways of doing drone delivery, remote ID updates. For a little bit, we're going to touch on that topic. Things like UAS traffic management, or UTM. And then also, some things in even the recreational community, because there's been some updates. And so that being said, we're first going to talk about a few of the things that happened in the last year or two. Because actually, one more question for the audience. How many people are new to the industry, maybe in the last couple of years? Okay, so we have some new people, so we're going to watch our acronym speak. We'll try to at least tell you what they are when we start using them. And then I assume everyone else has been, is anyone not from the industry at all? Okay, so we have a pretty informed audience. So we'll just sort of review what's been happening in the last couple of years, since we all haven't seen each other in person, make sure we're all up to speed on that, and then we'll talk about some of the new things that are going on. And so the first thing I'd like to talk about, because we really often delve right into the commercial, with the commercial space, and the commercial users, are pushing regulation policy, but we also have a whole part of the industry that's recreational users. And so we have an expert, Kevin from the FAA here, who worked really hard on some of the recent advances in that realm. And so I sort of want to pitch this over to him to talk about, what's more recent with recreational users, and specifically, Kevin, if you can talk about your trust work that you did.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Karen. So there's been a lot of changes with the recreational flyers, and right off the bat, I want to clarify some terms so we can all be on the same page. When we use the term recreational flyer, at the FAA in particular, we're referencing those people who are flying under Section 44809. That's often called the exemption or the carve-out to Part 107. From a regulatory standpoint, when the FAA published Part 107, that was the civil small UAS operating rule, which meant if you're going to fly a drone in the United States under 55 pounds, that's the rule you operate under, period. When the exception came out, it gave us a little bit of a carve-out to say, well, if you follow this set of rules under Section 44809, you don't need to get a remote pilot certificate. Some of your drones may not require registration. There are some different things under 44809 that are unique to recreational flyers. For example, you could fly an 80-pound drone under 44809, and that's done with purpose because a lot of people build scale replicas. Some, if you've seen them online, they're huge, right? So we needed to have that avenue for them to operate under. So that's been a really big change. Now, I say it's a big change even though it was put on the books a couple years ago, I think, at this point. But what has happened in the past year is that the FAA published the recreational UAS safety test. That's a mouthful, so we just call it trust. Congress required that recreational flyers, again, flying under that exception, are required to take and pass an aeronautical knowledge and safety test. This does not end up with any sort of certification. This is not like Part 107. They don't get an airman certificate. But what we needed to do is come up with a way that we could get recreational flyers the baseline information they need to know to fly safely into our national airspace system. That is the trust. So we've partnered with, I believe the number right now is 18 different organizations, non-FAA, to manage this program for us. My unique role with the trust is the team that I worked with, we pretty much wrote it. So just quick show of hands, how many people have actually taken the trust? All right. So I'm just going to assume the rest of you don't fly recreationally. It makes me sleep better at night. But at any rate, we wanted to make sure it was accessible to everyone and free online to take. And it's a one and done. You take it and you're done. But it is one of the requirements under 44809. So we've done a lot of work in getting this information out. The big piece that we're still missing right now is FAA recognized community-based organizations. This was another requirement from Congress that the FAA officially recognize these groups that do model aircraft or recreational type drone flying. We're getting there. We have an advisory circular that's out now, 91-57B as in Bravo. We just put out the C as in Charlie version of that for public comment. We took that back. We're going through those right now. But that will be the final step in really implementing everything Congress mandated the FAA do in 44809. So for rec flyers, it's been a very busy time, and I would expect that this year we're trying to forecast some things, and I'm being very careful with my words here, but my hope is that we'll have that advisory circular out, and then by the end of this year, the FAA will start officially recognizing those community-based organizations.
That's great. Thanks for that update, Kevin. That's a lot, that we've done in the last year or so. And just one other follow-on is how well is the community embracing the trust test? Have you seen a lot of people taking it?
Yeah, so right now we have just around 250,000 plus people that have taken the recreational UAS safety test, which is a great number considering it hasn't even been out a year. It takes a while for these things to build and for people to understand and become aware, but that's something we're continually promoting. As far as the public acceptance of it, I haven't gotten too much hate mail on it, so I think people are okay with it. We're always open to changing and updating and modifying, so if you have some ideas, please send them to us. We do listen to you, believe me, we do, and we'd be happy to update that as well. But I think it's going very, very well for a brand new program and something that the FAA really has never done anything like it before.
Yeah, and so as a community together, if you know anyone who's flying recreationally, please encourage them to go online and take that test. It's not difficult, and it actually really will help with our culture altogether. So I appreciate it. My son took it. I'm happy to. He's 17 years old, and he's actually getting his Part 107 too. So it's really kind of exciting. He finally thinks I'm cool. So finally. But anyway, okay, so I'm going to move on to the next topic, unless anyone has questions about that. And
the advisory circular is 91-57B as in Bravo is the current edition.
And then Charlie's coming, yeah. Okay, so moving on to other parts of regs, we're going to talk a little bit about the more recent amendments that have happened to our small UAS rule, Part 107. It was our firstborn rule in our industry, and that was all the way back in 2016 already. And then fast forward and we had that one single rule for a while, and then fast forward 5 years into, I think, January of last year, and then we got a regulatory tune-up on Part 107. And so I'm going to ask the panel to talk a little bit about, what those updates were, and then, sort of how that's affecting our industry. So I'm sorry to my other guys on the ends here, but I'm going to start with Kevin again, and then, I'll go to Grant and Jonathan on this topic. But Kevin, I want to specifically ask you is, how do we get to this rule change, and what's really important to know about it?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And remember, it's all about me.
Yes, of course. Us FAA.
Part 107, when it came out, we knew this was the first step in a lot of things. So we took a very, you hear the FAA talk a lot about crawl, walk, run approach, and we're doing that with our regulation. Now, 2016 might as well have been 1,000 years ago in terms of drone world. We evolved so fast. The FAA works very, very hard at trying to keep up with that pace. And believe it or not, we are doing a remarkable job on the UAS side of keeping up with that pace. If you look at how traditional government works with regulations, we're updating things at a very rapid pace. And so one of the things that we've updated, as everyone probably knows, is the operations over people portion of Part 107 and the night operations. And we can throw in operating over moving vehicles too. But those three, we'll call them enhancements, were built on the experience that we saw from operators, that we saw in our waiver application process, and that we could normalize into sort of what we like to call routine operations. So now the rule itself permits operations over people. It permits operating over moving vehicles. You can fly at night. I think, at least what I hear, one of the best parts of that rule, people will tell me, is that they can go online and take their recurrent test now for free. That was a big heartburn for a lot of folks, having to go back to a testing center, spend another $150 or so to do this recurrent test. Now it's just done online and free. So I think those three things are an evolution of what we saw from the community, from our stakeholders, from industry, that we're able to implement into rule. Now, ops over people is still evolving. There are things that need to happen as we move forward, but I think that's where we're getting to at the FAA, and I feel like those three enhancements are something that really shows our ability to at least hang on to the drone industry as it's moving so quickly, but it's something that we're really happy with.
Great. Okay, and so I'm going to ask Grant a question, because he's had a lot of clients, at least in the past, and I'm sure he's working now with DroneUp, about ops over people, because that's key to unlocking, advanced operations and scalability and economic viability and all those things that we need as an industry. So Grant, my question to you is, this particular tune-up to the rule, what did it open up for the industry, and how helpful has it been?
Well, I think that with the ops over people rule, the tune-up, many people are somewhat familiar with the fact that it established 4 categories under which you could operate without a waiver. But in any event, in most of these operations, it requires the submission of a declaration of compliance to the FAA, setting forth the means of compliance you are implementing, the FAA-approved means of compliance. So I think a lot of companies originally were really excited about the notion of being able to operate without a waiver. What we have seen, the rule has been implemented now for about a year. It was April of last year when it came into effect. What we have seen since then is the FAA has approved one means of compliance. There are several entities, I believe, operating under that means of compliance, but what we do know is the means of compliance requires, essentially, my understanding is that it does not have, it doesn't involve parachutes. And when you are utilizing a parachute, that allows you to satisfy the kinetic energy threshold easier than if you weren't using a parachute. My understanding is that this means of compliance that was approved, it wasn't for a parachute. So what we end up having with the means of compliance was, it was for around 20 pounds or less drones. Once you factor in the kinetic energy threshold, in working with the FAA with another client, we were told that it really gets you more around the 8.5, 9 pound area of how heavy your drone can be prior to accounting for the kinetic energy threshold. So needless to say, that's pretty limiting and a little bit discouraging, but in any event, the rule has been modified and it is a step in the right direction. We are hopeful that as time progresses, more means of compliance will be approved so that we're able to see more drones operating over people without waivers. I think the next big step is parachutes, and for the consideration of a parachute in that means of compliance. Once you account for that and you can operate heavier, and when I say heavier, I still mean under 55. I just mean above 20, or for all intents and purposes, 8.59. Once you account for the parachute, I'm hopeful that will open up the doors for more waiverless ops over people.
Awesome. That's really excellent information and a summary. And, Jonathan, when I first met you several years back, I just kind of remembered you as the guy that was just like churning out night waivers, like one after another. That was like the core of your business back then. So can you talk maybe just for a minute or two, like, what change this tune-up did for that?
People don't have to obtain night waivers anymore. You can operate by regulation, not by exception to the regulations, which is very beneficial for government resources and stuff that can focus on more important things. And so from the night waivers that I had originally done before, the FAA was able to allow a lot of them to go out and fly. They could monitor how many crashes, incidents, and stuff that happened there. From that, they could actually make risk assessments going forward so that it could validate the the night regulations portion that was changed. So that was kind of a precursor to validate what came out. And so that same thing with beyond line of sight, they'll do the same data gathering, and then that'll go into future rulemakings.
Yep, so that was really good progress that we saw there, so appreciate that, FAA friend. Okay, so in continuing talking about waivers and authorizations and exemptions, one of the things that when we were doing our pre-planning for this panel, I think it was one of the guys brought up, there's a lot of confusion. People use those terms interchangeably. So I thought, especially since we have some new people in the room, and just a refresher for the rest of us, because I know that I'm myself am guilty of it, of interchanging some of those terms. I was just going to ask John, since you have the microphone, can you just real quick give us a down low on the difference between them, even from a legal perspective, so we're all using it in the right way, those terms?
Right, you have to start with the text. So specifically look at the text to what it says. Does it say anything in there about an authorization? So specifically under like 14 CFR part, so under part 107, 107.41 specifically says, hey, if you're going to operate in Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or Echo 2 airspace, you need to have an authorization. So that says you have to get a COA, a certificate of authorization, for if you need to do something different, right, in that area, right, because Part 107 does not allow it by regulation. Waivers, you have to look specifically in the regulations, and Part 91 as well as Part 107 in the back have a list of all the regulations that are waivable. And so like 107.36 is not there, but 107.31 for beyond line of sight is, right? And so then you're like, okay, if you want to fly beyond line of sight, we can obtain a waiver for that. 107.41 is also waivable as well, but you have to look at the text. And then lastly, if the regulation specifically does not say authorization and that list in the back does not say waivers, the only option at that point is you have to obtain an exemption. Exemptions are kind of very broad. You can exempt a lot of things, but there's I would say at least two things that FAA won't probably entertain. One is where by statute the thing is required, so you can't get an exemption from a Part 61 or Part 107 remote pilot certificate. They're going to say by statute we're required to do that. We can't exempt you from what Congress has told us to do. So they're just not going to, you're going to get denied. And if you also try to play games with redefining definitions. So, hey, it's no longer small unmanned aircraft under Part 51. Under 55 pounds, right? We're going to define it as like under 100 or 200 pounds. They're not going to entertain doing redefinitioning via exemption. Those are two exceptions they just won't entertain.
Cool. Thanks for that. Everybody got it now? Difference between them? Just remember that, because if you're talking with the FAA, they expect you to understand the difference between those. So it is kind of important, even though, it's definitions, commit it to memory. So Kevin, I'm going to ask you then, what is more recent? What are some upgrades that we've seen with, in particular, waivers and authorizations?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of improvement in both waivers and authorizations, and thank you, John, for kind of clarifying that, because we still do get requests in where people mix up those two things, authorization, where they want to just fly in Class Charlie airspace, so they come in and they apply for an airspace waiver. That's not what you want. You want an authorization. So what we've tried to do in forums like this and through our Drone Zone account where people can apply for waivers is to try to plain language them a little bit more for our audience and in fact, if you look at Drone Zone, it's more of a radio click button process now than it was before. We really try to do a lot more to guide the applicant through a waiver process because, to be completely honest, it's been a learning curve on both sides. The FAA traditionally, when we deal with waivers, we had an expectation that the aviation community knew exactly what they wanted, how they wanted to get it done, and that they would come to us with everything having done their research. That doesn't work in the drone community. The drone community doesn't have years and years and 100 years plus of aviation experience, and it was really a bit of an unfair expectation to have the drone community come and apply for, let's say back in the day when John was writing all those night waivers, to apply for a night waiver and have all the risk mitigation and hazard identification things in there that we would expect. So it's been a learning curve for the drone community to understand how they need to apply, and it's been a learning curve for us at the FAA to how we communicate with that drone community and set that expectation. So we've done things like waiver safety explanation guidelines. We've done webinars to help people through the waiver process. We've updated our Drone Zone account to make it a little more plain language to help people through that process so that we're not wasting your time, you're not wasting our time, and in the end we have a better product and we help get waivers. And that same process has also worked through our authorization piece. I mean, if you've been in this drone industry more than 2.5 years at this point, you probably remember how challenging it was to get an airspace authorization to go fly in a particular area. And then Lance came along, the low altitude authorization notification capability, which is probably our crown jewel of what we've done for UAS in terms of community acceptance and happiness with the product. In fact, just earlier this year, we processed our 1 millionth Lance authorization. So the program has expanded to over 700 airports in the United States. It continues to expand. We just opened it up for recreational flyers a bit ago. For Part 107 operators, we've opened it up for night authorization. So that program continues to evolve. So what we're trying to do is enable our systems to support the operations that you all need to fly. And I think the waiver process and Lance are two really good examples of that improvement.
Yes, I agree. I love it. We got to like a 1 million on something, so that's fantastic.
You know how bad I wanted to do the 1 million thing.
I know, I just kind of like really held myself back from that. But okay, so if you can pass to Grant, I'm going to ask Grant. He's like the bad guy, like the good cop, the bad cop. So what are the ongoing challenges that we have with this regulatory process right now? And are there any changes we should be watching for coming up real soon?
So I think without a doubt, in addition to the operations over people matter we discussed a second ago and opening that up, getting some more approved means of compliance out there, by far the biggest issue that stands in the way of scaling this industry is still BVLOS. And thankfully, we did have the BVLOS ARC, which released a report earlier this year, and there's a lot of mixed opinions on those recommendations. There's 5 general categories of recommendations in there. And I think that even implementation of a couple of those categories could go a long way in helping us scale this industry. So we'll see, but without a doubt, it's certainly BVLOS. And I'll say that as we move into seeing more companies interested in drone deliveries, there's the ongoing issue with Part 135 and how difficult it is to obtain a Part 135. I remember when I first started practicing this space about 4 or 5 years ago, it was, you go to the FAA website, it says, this is what you have to do to get 135. Okay, well, you don't have a type certified aircraft, so what do? Well, here's an exemption you can apply for. Well, as time went on, we saw at that point there were 2 companies, UPS and Google Wing, that had obtained Part 135s, varying categories of 135 because there's different types. But Amazon, we saw still in that process working towards getting their Part 135 as well. I had several clients who were interested in getting in the game and applying for Part 135. When we went to do it, the FAA said, we're really moving away from the exemptions for type certification, and we're going to require you to be in the type certification process or to identify a drone that is in the type certification process prior to getting too far into the weeds on your Part 135. Does anyone know how many fully type certified drones there are out there? Dawn has it, 0. So imagine having, telling clients and telling other operators in the industry that there are no type certified drones. There are some drones that are far along in that process and that we're hopeful will be type certified soon. But so I think, I can't speak for the FAA, but I think seeing the delays, it may have been an impetus for having the BVLOS ARC, and you had some of the boldest and brightest minds assemble over about a 9-month period and have those discussions. And I think they put out a great report. We'll see if anything comes from it. But right now, the biggest issue, aside from ops over people, is certainly BVLOS, and it's going to continue to be until we can see some regulatory traction there. But the other thing I want to add real quick is that the other side of things is that public perception. I often say they go hand in hand. The regulatory environment will improve as public perception improves. And we saw that with drone deliveries during COVID, with people having a higher demand for social distancing and contactless deliveries. I think that kind of opened up the possibilities for more drone deliveries, and I'm hopeful as public perception continues to improve, we'll continue to see augmented, more widespread drone operations.
That's fantastic. And I do want to get back to BVOS in a second, but there's one other thing about exemptions that I wanted to bring up to make sure everyone's aware. The authorization for that, for the administrator to grant exemptions is in section 44807, and that's going to be sunsetting soon. So, you know, if you're out there talking to the FAA, or, you know, things like that. So we just need to make sure that we either extend that or we reimagine it with the new reauthorization coming up. But just be aware that that's, you know, on the books, going to be closing sooner than later. So we need that ability to, you know, it's one of our pathways. So, oh, go ahead, yeah.
Just following up on the 135 stuff. So specifically, like beyond line of sight, with a non-package you know, compensation or hire situation, that's kind of like going to be even further out down the line compared to just normal commercial air operations doing aerial data capture. One reason why is from, I deal a lot with the operators on, specifically on the 137 crop dusting side. And so with keeping the finger on the pulse there, the FAA's, primarily the flight standards, they switched over to doing a national applicant list, primarily to keep track of everybody that's coming on. So these are all the operators, the 121, 135, 137, 141, they're all coming on. And so what I'm noticing right now is that is actually starting to get even backlogged. Last I heard, that number was about 390 people were on that applicant list nationwide. And so it's starting to grow even further. And then, I mean, Kevin, you might be able to even follow up furthermore from a flight standards situation, right? You have CSOP. So not only does the guy get, the operator get certified and there's a certificate holding district office, like somebody like Kevin's going to have to like follow up with them and make sure they're actually, you know, watching. And that, you know, what does that entail? How much time commitment do you think is potentially involved in that? It's
right.
more like a funding issue.
Let me see how I can answer this and keep my job. So John's right, and actually both my colleagues up here are correct in that some of the challenges we have with type certification of drones. I do a little bit of damage control here. We just recently posted to the Federal Register notice, I believe the number is 12, drones where we've identified the accepted process for them to meet our airworthiness criteria. So we're not issuing airworthiness certificates to the drones yet, but we've said, hey, that particular drone with the process involved here, that will meet our requirements for type certification. Go ahead and move that drone through. So we're definitely getting there. The problem that we have at the FAA is a problem I think a lot of us have even in industry, which is staffing. It's something that it's very, very difficult to staff fully, and with drones in particular, the list that John had mentioned, and then moving into the CSOP process, where when you get into that process, you're assigned FAA people to a team, really. Typically an operations inspector, an airworthiness inspector, and maybe even an avionics inspector to help you through that certification process. That team comes at the FSDO level. And so it can be very, very challenging for FSDOs who are working their normal caseload of Part 135, 121, 137, 141, 145s, all these different FAA certificated type operations to add on all these drones that are coming at a very rapid pace. So it's a challenge for the FAA, it really is. How we solve that is going to be probably a combination of ingenuity and hiring and trying to make sure that the process continues to flow so the backlog that is sort of building doesn't continue. We can sort of whittle away at that, but it's definitely going to be a challenge.
Cool. I'm already getting hand signals from Dawn letting me know our time is quickly evaporating. So since we're kind of on this topic and there's so many on our list, I do want to just touch on, first of all, I appreciate everyone in this room that was part of the BVLOS ARC. That was a 9-month, or maybe even 10, I forget, really long haul, and you delivered recommendations on all of our behalf to the FAA, and we're excited to see, and hopefully we'll hear some things from the FAA at this conference this week on, what are they going to do with that, or at least what's their timeline and their plan. But along those lines, we've heard some things. I mean, if you're keeping up with the industry globally, in other countries, in the European Union and in Canada, Australia, they have other ways that they're doing BVLOS, at EASA, they also put out U-Space for UTM, and so we don't have time to go into all those global regulations. So I apologize because I know it was in the title of our, and we're focusing mostly in U.S. It was in the title of our talk, but I do want to ask Kevin, what is the FAA doing, working globally in the arena?
Yeah, so that's something that we're keenly aware of, is that we're not doing this in a bubble here in the United States. There are other organizations and governing bodies that are working through the same challenges we are. Arguably, some will say they're further along, others maybe not so far. But for example, Jay Merkel, who's our executive director of our U.S. Immigration Office, was just in Europe at a conference and where they talked a lot about BVLOS. So the communications that the FAA has with our partners in Canada, in Europe, across the world is ongoing. It's a never-ending communication where we're trying to see what's working over here, can that work here, and that road goes both ways. So flip-flop it, what works here, what can work over there. So it's something that is an additional challenge for the FAA, but I feel like the amount of communication, the outreach and collaboration that we're doing with our partners across the globe is going to end up making a very better product here for everyone.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so there's 2 more topics. I have 5 minutes, so we have 2 topics that I just want to touch on real quick to give you some really quick updates on what's happening. So we have Jonathan here, and he's really involved with some of the remote ID issues that are going on. But before we talk about that quickly, Jonathan, I just wanted to ask Grant. So that rule was published in January 2021, and there's some dates that we should all be aware of for compliance. So can you maybe tick through those real quick if they have them?
Remote ID compliance.
Remote ID, yeah.
Okay, so I don't want to botch this. I think there's one later this year for manufacturers. Is that right, John?
Yeah.
I think
September.
September, yeah. And then the one for operators follows. Is that 6 months behind it?
A year.
A year behind it. So in fall of 2023, we can expect drone operators to need to be compliant with remote ID regulations unless something happens to stop that.
Yeah, and so standards aren't accepted yet, but we're hoping that's coming too. And, kind of along those lines, John, can you just quickly let us know about sort of the timeline and the process, what's going on with the remote ID case?
Yeah, I mean, the oral arguments were on December the 15th, and so we're waiting on a ruling any day now. I've been paying attention to the opinions, and so cases argued before ours and also after ours have been getting ruled on, so it literally can be any day now.
Okay, and so that's with, you're representing Race Day Quads.
Right, there's Race Day Quads and Tyler Brennan.
Okay, yeah, versus FAA, and good luck with that battle, both sides, we'll figure it out, no matter what the outcome of it is, right? No matter us, I promised Kevin I wouldn't get him in trouble or fired, but if you do, there's a place for you at Aero DeMeo. It's all good. Anyway, so just be aware that, that's going on and keep an eye out for it. And no matter what the outcome is, together we'll get through that as a community, and we'll keep moving because we have so much to do and so promising the future in this field. So just real quick, because we're out of time and I want to see if there's any questions. I just want to touch on UTM because there is something to be watching for right now. There's no regulations or policy really in sight, but there is activity going on. The FAA and NASA have a new UTM field test underway. It's going to be conducted at test sites, and I believe that the SIR or the RFP, however they're doing it, is out right now. And in these field tests, it's sort of follow on to other UTM programs that have been going on in the last few years. They're going to be looking at the industry standards and how to advance development of the capability standards and policies. And so they're going to be looking at emerging UTM services, and some new things they're going to be looking at operational setting. So if you weren't aware of that, that is something new that's happening literally right now. And of course, NASA's put out concept of operations on it, FAA does too, and so this is the two of them working together to sort of continue to advance that. Globally, we've seen, for example, the ASTM has put out, also ASTM has just released, actually not just, I think it was in January, the F3548-21 for USS interoperability standards, builds off a network remote ID, and so there's some things there too. So if you're into that part of the industry, there's some things to be watching and seeing what's going on, around the world. That's really all the topics we wanted to cover. I do want to ask the panel if they have, we're going to open up to questions again, and I just want to ask the panel if they have one piece of advice, because we have two attorneys and FAA up here. Like, what would you tell either new people or people in the industry right now? What advice would you give them?
Read the law and know it, or hire someone that knows it.
There you go. Plug.
I would say stay up to date on our websites. We have a couple of social media accounts on Twitter and Facebook. They're FAA Drone Zone. We post all the latest information there, so follow us there. And if you ever have a question, please reach out to us. Help at uashelp@faa.gov. We monitor that all weekend long, so we can help you out there.
Always be brave and not afraid to ask the FAA for permission to do something. The worst that can happen is say no, but you'll never get a yes if you don't ask.
Yeah, and I also like to add on to that, where they've said no in the past, as things are evolving, we're collecting data, we're advancing regulations, they're thinking and opening new things up. Even if they said no to you in the past, you can re-ask again, and you might get a yes the next time. So I know some of my clients that I'm working with, in the past, they're like, oh, we asked for it, we didn't get it. I'm like, let's go back now, because I know that they're saying yes to some of those things. So, and that's really good advice. I actually caught us up, and I think we are running on time, and there's time for questions. There's great people up here, so if you have any questions, we're going to get started with that. Oh, I think we have one mic, so we're going to be sharing.
Hi, my name is Tony Drummond. I'm from Global Aerial Management Group and Prestige Air Group, and this question is for Kevin. I am wondering, as far as the training is concerned from the FAA's perspective, are you training the POIs to be able to take on UAS cases, or are we starting with new POIs? For instance, our POI is really, really obviously unfamiliar, and we're working on our Part 137, so it's been quite a challenge. And we are now back somewhere in that list.
And for those that don't know, can you explain the acronym POI?
Oh, our Principal Operations Inspector, that's given to us by the FAA.
Thank you.
You're going to get your steps in today, Don. Yeah, thank you for that question. So, short answer, yes. And it's a very large task. Most principal operations inspectors come from traditional aviation. They're pilots flying aircraft around, and drones are still very new to them. What we do is every week we have an hour to an hour and a half training segment with the field offices. We generally have 250 to 300 inspectors attend that weekly training, and that's meant to keep them up to date on everything that's happening. They can submit questions and ask them. We track everything. They can go back and watch it, and they can see the question, the FAQs. So that happens every single week. And then we also do what we call deep dives, where we get into the very technical aspects of, let's say, going through a Part 137 drone certification. How does that work? And we get into the exemption piece of it and how that works. So we do that training. It's ongoing. It's been going for a few years, but it is definitely challenging. It goes back to our resource availability in the office, and we don't have as many people in a lot of field offices. Some are worse off than even others, so they get tied up with other things. But it's something that we're constantly trying to educate and train them on, so that so for example, one POI might manage 50 Part 137 certificates, right? And now all of a sudden one wants to add a drone. Well, this is something they've never experienced before. So we're trying to get them that information ahead of time so they're not blindsided, so that process doesn't back up, slow down, or get caught. And that you can always reach out to the office if you feel like something's not going right, or you've been waiting for a long time for the FAA to respond. Please reach out. I mean, we do try to be customer service cognizant and try to help out as best we can. So if you need that extra help, reach out to the office. But yeah, we educate quite a bit.
And, oh, hands everywhere. I love it.
Hi, Debbie Kirkman, Flight Safety Foundation. I have a question. This is kind of related to your staffing. The Aviation Trust Fund is supported by ticket taxes, fuel taxes, et cetera. There's not a similar way for the drone industry to fund the FAA's efforts. Are there any discussions with Congress on potential changes to those regulations, in terms of UTM or other infrastructure, of how those would be supported financially?
I have to say that's an excellent question because I know this is handled a lot at the state level, and they use those aviation taxes not for UAS or AM at all. So I don't know if anybody can address that.
Yeah.
Any comments, thoughts?
Well, I do know that in the January 2022 significant rulemaking report that DOT put out, they did have a rulemaking that the FAA was working on, primarily how to recoup costs. I don't know how broad that's going to be in regards to potentially spilling over into unmanned aircraft and recouping costs from things there. So I don't know if he can say anything, but I'll say something.
Yeah.
Next question?
That's a good question. You can, and I would keep asking it too, because,
Next question for you.
it's not
I'll
necessarily
cover
where
for you.
Kevin's lane in FAA.
He's not
Again,
allowed to talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's a state issue too, not just
Yes,
a federal issue,
exactly,
right? So
yeah.
your state may be doing something that's not super helpful.
Great. Kelly Eccles, patent attorney by day, startup founder by night. So ground effect vehicles, so let's say you have a drone that's not flying overhead, so what regulations might apply to something that's either transporting cargo over water or say over land but not overhead?
We're having a whole panel on this afternoon.
Yeah.
But the question was, what are the regulations for the land and sea vehicles? I don't know if anybody, that's not Kevin.
It's not flying.
Wait, so one more time, I was trying to pull up that rule.
Regulations for land and sea autonomous vehicles.
In the air. They're still flying, but they're not flying overhead.
Are you talking primarily from like boats and stuff and so you're like flying over like Tampa Harbor or something like that, and there's people in the boats, and you're primarily looking at ground risk? Is that the primary question?
Or like ship to shore?
Okay, like so, yeah, I understand. So, I mean, if you're going to be flying in the national airspace, right, it's an aircraft. So look at the definition of aircraft under 49 USC 40102. If it's intended to be flown in the sky, then it's going to be controlled at that point under the federal aviation statutes. Look over at Part 91. It's going to typically go, I believe, out to 12 nautical miles off the seashore. So it's very broad, the United States airspace. And so then at that point, you kind of look at the weight of the aircraft. Are you putting people on board? Well, if you're putting people on board, then it's no longer going to be under Part 107. You're going to be dealing with Part 91. So if you're flying under 55 pounds and it's uncrewed, then you're going to be under Part 107, right? And if it's recreational, I guess you could be 49 USC 44809. Those are, I guess, the multiple different ways you can kind of deal with that. But it's airspace. I guess you're looking at the ground versus air. It's more like if it's in the air, then the FAA controls it. The benefit is if it's over water, then there's less people, so there's lower ground risk. So technically, you could have a more dangerous aircraft there because in reality, there's less people, right? The probability of hitting Pearson is less. That brings up a couple different issues there primarily because look at drones as there's an analogy right there with like tethered drones and stuff, right? They're kind of got a foot on the ground with a foot in the sky and the same equivalent there. So if FAA is regulating unmanned aircraft that are tethered, right, then there's an analogy there. I think might be very helpful right there is reach out to the General Counsel's office at the FAA to specifically ask at what point does that become like, is there a boat, right? We got so much of it underwater or touching water, and then, okay, now it's completely not touching anything. Now it's an aircraft, right? But 49 USC 40102 for the definition of aircraft is kind of broad. I mean, you could kind of argue that thing applies to like golf balls and frisbees and all sorts of stuff intended to be flown through the sky, right?
Yeah.
Well, I know, but there's a discretion on the FAA's part and the General Counsel's part where they'll kind of draw the line on that. So that would be helpful to find that out as to where they want to go, hey, I want to deal with that, and maybe not.
Yep, I think we'll invite you two to get together and talk that one through. Do we have time for any more? Or are you moving on to, yeah, I'm sorry. This is so fun. Thank you, Dawn, for the opportunity, and thanks to my fantastic panel. It's not every day I get to interrogate attorneys and the FAA, so right. It's really fun. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks. Wait, don't wait.
All right, very good. So that panel did occur in April at XPONENTIAL, AUVSI XPONENTIAL in Orlando, Florida. And if it shows one thing, it's how dynamic this area of law, regulation, policy is, because a number of things have changed even since April. And some of you, at least one of you noted, absolutely yes. One example of that is when we talked about type certification, and at the time the answer was 0 drones were type certified. Just, I believe it was like September 16th or 19th, it was announced that Matternet has received the very first type certification. So there is now one. You know, a lot of other things have happened. One person mentioned they're really bummed that there was only about 5 minutes on remote ID. Obviously, super awkward there with the guys suing the FAA and the FAA next to each other. But to catch everybody up real quick, the FAA prevailed in that lawsuit, Race Day Quads versus FAA, challenging both the procedural aspects and the constitutionality of the remote ID rule. The court's ruling finally came out this summer, and I did an article on that for Inside Unmanned Systems magazine. Basically, it was the title of the article is FAA just won the remote ID case, thank you, next. So read that, because what it does, it will get you up to speed on what the court actually said. I do a pretty extensive blow-by-blow on that. And I will say that because it was a facial challenge, meaning the rule, as noted by the panel, has not actually been implemented yet. So manufacturers are supposed to be, actually September 16th was the day the manufacturers were supposed to comply. Well, we didn't know if that rule was even going to be upheld until just about a month and a half ago. So the FAA just recently put out a policy memo stating that they're going to give a 90-day grace period for manufacturers or OEMs to comply with the remote ID requirements. And they're going to use their discretionary authority, you know, and not go out hammering people for not being compliant over the next 90 days. They just want to make sure people are moving towards compliance. And I'm sure if there's an issue that, you know, a particular manufacturer is trying their best, but aren't, you know, they're not going to cut it in the 90 days, I'm sure they can work with the FAA to talk through that. But I know, as an example, DJI and I believe Wingtra have already put out their declarations of compliance and their means of compliance. And so that's on the FAA website. You can check that out for yourself. Speaking of the FAA website, it's chock full of information. So we have questions here like, hey, you know, I'm a farmer. I have like 300 acres of land. How do I get a BVLOS, a waiver? The FAA has a really excellent waiver page. You can Google 107.31 and pull up all the waivers that have been given for pretty much all time for BVLOS. Now, what you'll see, you will not see the actual application of what people said they were going to do, but what you will see is a very detailed, as kind of Kevin Morris outlined a little bit, very detailed explanation of the FAA's like operational requirements in there. And I think that would be a really good leg up to understand, you know, how you could apply. I would highly recommend the use of an attorney in working through that and getting that, that waiver approved. If you've never done it yourself, I don't know there's any like, kind of BVLOS waiver in a kit that's super useful. I think people have been pretty close hold in a way about exactly what safety mechanisms they're putting in place through which they're then able to get those BVLOS waivers. So there's a number of law firms, you know, like Grant Giat's law firm, he just left. Adams and Reese, as an example, has a UAS practice, but I'm not endorsing any one particular law firm. I'm just saying there are law firms out there that have drone practices and probably don't charge a ton of money to help somebody get a waiver, especially a small business. Let's see. Lots of other questions, even on the recreational flying. And so Somebody asked, if someone is flying recreational and wants to post that video, would they have to score the 107 ticket too? And if my video, relatedly, but conversely, if my video earns money on YouTube, is that compensation? What I would say to that is, if you have any intention whatsoever of monetizing your YouTube videos, either now or in the future, or if you're using your drone videos to enhance or promote a business, a drone business in any way, I would highly recommend getting your Part 107 remote pilot's license before filming those videos, because if you post them, for some reason you start making money off of it, and then after the fact you get your 107, it's not retroactive. So just be very cautious about that. I always say better safe than sorry. Just go ahead and get your 107. There was also another question. If you have your Part 107, do you need the trust to fly recreationally? And what I would say is, if you want to fly recreationally and you don't have the trust and all you have is the 107 and you get stopped for whatever reason by law enforcement or FAA, they're going to hold you then to the 107 standards. So in other words, if you want the flexibility of the looser rules, or as the example, I think Kevin mentioned, you could fly like an 80-pound drone recreationally. If you want that kind of flexibility, just take the trust test. I took it, and I'm telling you, if I can pass it, anybody can. It took probably 15 minutes or less. So, why not? Everybody should just go out there, take the trust test, print out the certificate, stick it in your drone bag, and just have it with you, just like you have your Part 107. It's really a no-brainer, and that's just my personal opinion. Let's see. Yeah, and along those lines, one of our viewers said, hey, when you have your Part 107, just a note, with the new rules that came out in 2021, you still have to retest, but it's free now. And so, watch the program, take the test, score 100%, and keep that piece of paper in your pocket as well. So keep the trust test and the 107 retest, which now is free and online, also in your drone kit when you go out on a job or you're just going out and flying around. Okay, there's one other question here. Within the technical provisions of BVLOS, are relays and repeater stations allowed, for example, a fixed operation? And what I would say is, again, check out the FAA's waiver page. You can literally put in 107.31 and read every single one that's been granted. I'm going to go out on a limb and say yes. I think there's a lot of flexibility here, and but I don't know. So you're going to have to read through those. I don't know for sure. So you're going to have to read through those. But the technical provisions of BVLOS, at the end of the day, the FAA is going to grant those waivers if there's sufficient safety mechanisms in place. And so if a relay or repeater station can enhance safety along with all the other things that you're bringing to the table, then my thinking is you would actually get that. And I feel like, just from an observer over the last year or so, the FAA has been, and you can check this out yourself, the acceleration of BVLOS waivers, especially now that the BVLOS ARC report is in. I feel like, COVID has accelerated that, the need for, more remote and long distance operations for humanitarian and other really societal good purposes using drones. I feel like there's been a kind of a flurry of waivers that have come about for BVLOS that we were not seeing before. So when you talk about the crawl, walk, run approach, I feel like for BVLOS, we're absolutely in that walking phase, and hopefully we're going to get to running soon. Fun fact, everybody, I was just in DC last week with Abigail Smith. Abby Smith is the Deputy Director of the UAS Integration Office. We were at the EDGE 2022 event at the Tower Club with the Government Business Executive Forum. By the way, you can check that out online. She literally said in December, they're going to put out a consolidated list of rulemaking for next year in the Federal Register. So stay tuned, because I feel like there's going to be bits and pieces of maybe that 400 plus page BVLOS ARC report that might get implemented in pieces and parts. So more to follow. I don't think it's going to be one giant rule. I think it's going to be a little bit at a time, but I think there's going to be progress. So, for if you're not following me on social media and LinkedIn, I encourage you to do so, because I'm posting up 2 to 3 things a day about the industry, and all of my podcasts stream across there. So we've got the Dawn of Drones every Wednesday. That's more like company profiles wrapped around a monthly theme. This year it's with Drone Life, but we're migrating to AUVSI platforms in 2023. It will still be every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Mountain, 11 Eastern. So check it out right now on Drone Life TV on YouTube, or on my Dawn Zoldai YouTube channel, or of course across my LinkedIn. We just kicked off 2 new podcasts this year. The Full Crew is a newscast, and it's focused on technology. So every Monday at 9 a.m. Mountain, 11 Eastern, me and Mike Peel, formerly the chairperson of Interdrone, he's also my producer, by the way, we co-host this thing, and we have 2 guests from the tech industry, emerging technologies, not always drones, and we grab headlines and we talk about them, whether it's artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, spectrum management, all kinds of really cool issues that are relevant to probably what you do on a daily basis. And then last but certainly not least, our Full Tilt, which is Tech Industry Leadership Talks podcast. It's really, it's bottom line, it's about leadership. And today we had Jennifer Richter, a partner at Aiken Gump, on, and it was just spectacular. We've had Hui Tran from NASA, General Poss. You can check all these out again on my website, or join the Full Crew at fullcrew.io to get those notifications. Full Tilt is every other Tuesday, 9 a.m. Mountain, 11 Eastern. So we hope you join us there. Some really great content and really amazing people. There's also additional information in this book that I authored for the Unmanned Safety Institute. This book, I wrote it for the high school level, but it covers everything from the Constitution and all the relevant statutory authorities, this issue of waiver exemptions, deviations, and then, specific chapters on like privacy, security, and even kind of running your own business at the end. So check that out on the Unmanned Safety Institute's website. And I believe we'll have that book available again next year at our next Law Tech Connect workshop at AUVSI XPONENTIAL on Monday. I believe it's May 8th in 2023 in Denver, Colorado. So hope to see you all there in person, because it was such a great event. And by the way, fun fact, AUVSI is pushing out all 8 hours of this content onto their new AVIL platform. So that should be coming out on October 3rd. And if you know any attorneys, all 8 hours have been certified by the Florida Bar for just a small price. They can actually receive the continuing legal education credits by watching those 8 hours. So having that additionally available. Really, that's all she wrote. I really wanted to thank you for this time. It's been a real honor and privilege to spend tonight with you. And thank you so much for those that put in comments and questions into the chat. We really appreciate you, and hope to see you around. In the meantime, everybody, fly safe. We're out here.